Read some of the titles that are attached to our next guest who is going to be here on center stage. Data Guardian, Oracle of Privacy, Web Superstar, Astronaut Wannabe, and a Fossil Finder. The challenge today, of course, is to get him to talk about all of that in 30 minutes. High speed and open data. Please help me welcome Chairman and co-founder of the Open Data Institute, Sir Nigel Shadbolt. Sir Nigel, hi. Come on, take a seat here with me. So, good to have you with us today.
Pleasure.
There's been a lot of anticipation about you coming to meet with us. You are considered one of the fathers of the internet, the World Wide Web as we know it. It's turning 25 years old this week. Why aren't we throwing a party?
Oh, there'll be a party. I think there'll be a party kind of kicking off sometime around midnight tomorrow night and extending through for about a year, a virtual party. So we're going to be asking lots of people to kind of pitch in and associate themselves to celebrate the 25 years of the web's existence.
Is there a reason to celebrate? You know, we started today's session with Mr. Kaspersky talking about the cyber jungle, saying himself that many times he's paranoid about what could happen. We could be thrown back to the 19th century.
Yeah.
Is there a reason to celebrate?
Oh, there's huge numbers of reasons to celebrate. I mean, the web has without doubt been one of the most powerful instruments. It's changed humanity's ability to communicate, to collaborate, to share information, knowledge, insights. We use it to kind of shape and model and change all aspects of our lives. So there's every reason to celebrate. Of course, you know, it's a reflection of humankind, so there are the darker sides to its use on occasions, but that's us humans, really. We've got to take and celebrate the best that the web can give us, and I think open data is a good example of that.
Okay, and you brought some examples today to tell us about that.
Yeah, maybe I'll just kind of stand up and introduce some of these examples. So, open data. What we've been doing here is looking at a whole tradition of, if we can get the slides up on the screen, we have, there we go. So I kind of wear a couple of hats on this. So I'm chairman of the Open Data Institute in London, but I also head up the Web and Internet Science Group at the University of Southampton. Here's a great example of open data used in the public health domain. So here we have essentially data about your likelihood of dying prematurely in England. Now, you know, not to worry too much, but it's interesting to know what the main causes of premature death are. And we've got very comprehensive data now for the 4 main killers in England, and we can see how different regions vary and compare. An only thing to note here is if you happen to be living in Manchester, you're 150th in the league table. Okay, you're gonna on average lose more of your life prematurely than somebody living in the posh parts of London. Now, that is uncontestable data. It's now available, and of course, once that data is available, people want to know why. They want to understand the consequences, the reasons. We've got examples in spending and the way the government uses and allocates contracts. Very important that we should know what the government is doing with our money and how that is being spent. This data is now being used to actually provide business intelligence back to the business community and to government itself. You can compare the detailed spending of all local and national government agencies in the UK. Here we've got an example, though, that shows you that open data can generate real value. This is a company, the Climate Corporation, was acquired by Monsanto last year for $900 and some million, nearly $1 billion. Its business is based on open data. Weather data, data about the conditions in the local conditions, soil conditions, the conditions in particular areas of the US, and they've used it to build very precise insurance products that have really made a difference to the farming community in the US. These are some examples from our own work at the Open Data Institute, where we've looked at the way in which the country's physicians prescribe drugs. And we've been able to identify real savings, £200 million of savings in 1 year for one class of drug. In this case, statins, things to control high blood pressure, had the GPs been prescribing the cheaper version of the drug. Now, these are important insights. They're insights we can see in the way in which companies organize themselves, insights about the way in which contracts get tendered and procured. This is a very recent story that we've just published out from one of our startups at the Open Data Institute, a company that's looked at the procurement process in Europe using data. And it reveals a rather alarming fact that the UK, on average, if you try and procure a contract with government in January the 1st, it takes to about August to get it released. We don't do well. Now, these provide and stimulate insights. So we believe that we can see with open data on the web, used and disseminated via the web, a huge range of opportunities. It's not just about data, it's about having open licenses and open standards, open participation. And the key, and I think it suits CBIT very well, is that it promotes and provides an opportunity for open innovation. So those are some examples, and I just want to leave you with the fact that we understand that the data space is a large and complex one. So when we talk about open data, it's also important to know there is personal data. And we're not proposing to make this open. In fact, there's a very real move in the UK to give individuals control and access to their own information. We call it the My Data program. And whilst we worry about the balance between where information sits on the web, one of the fundamental readjustments is to allow the possibility that we individuals can get access to our own information so that we can begin to take benefit of servicers and third-party intermediaries and providers who can use that data with our permission to provide great services. And we see those sorts of examples occurring in the commercial space now. And what applies to the commercial space should apply to government. These are just some of the databases here from cradle to grave, literally, which the state collects information about individuals. And we believe that that information should, where possible, be made available and accessible to the individuals. That rebalancing of the asymmetry between individuals and their information will do a lot to address concerns around information self-determination, trust around personal information. So a very quick review of some of the key issues, and a final set of concerns are what you do to analyze this data. So the whole issue around AI and advanced algorithms is how you begin to apply those insights to these huge amounts of data. And indeed, on another thread of my work, working with colleagues at the University of Southampton and the Fraunhofer Institute, we have a whole series of projects being demoed and showcased in Hall 9 that talk about the ability to take this deluge of data on the web and analyze it and make sense of it. So that gives you, I think, a brief sense of the kinds of things that occupy my thinking on a day-to-day basis. Okay.
I think it's fantastic. I think another title we could give you would be Bureaucracy Buster.
Yeah.
I mean, this is excellent for cutting through red tape. I mean, I know you're an advisor to the UK government. Yeah. How open is the government to this?
Well, I think one of the key features of open data is exactly as you say, Brent. It is it disintermediates large parts of the governmental bureaucratic process. It should do, and it could do. And I think that's one of the powerful motivations to open this data up, is that other people build services often better, more cheaply than the government IT providers, and get it back to users and citizens in a way that they can make sense of. So absolutely, I think this is a key feature.
Is there a reason for the government to actually be afraid of this? Because you could actually put some government agencies out of business.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons you will hear. Usually when you try and do this open data work, there are about a well-rehearsed set of reasons why you wouldn't want to do it. You know, everything from people might misuse the data or misinterpret it, or it's not quite good enough to release yet, through to an understandable fear that maybe this is going to cut out an entire tier of processing or bureaucracy. But that's always been the case with, one would hope, the march of the information age, where possible to get hold of inefficiencies and make them more efficient.
Are there certain political persuasions that are more open to what you do? I mean, does Labour like you more, or do the Tories like you more?
Oh, now there's a question.
Yeah.
Actually, it's interesting to note that Tim Berners-Lee and I were appointed under a Labour administration, but were asked to continue under the current coalition government. We actually believe, interestingly enough, this is a non-partisan issue. And the interesting reason for that is that open appeals to progressive, left-wing politicians on the one hand and conservative politicians on the other. In fact, I was at a meeting in the US last year where the Tea Party sat down with the Democrats, and one of the very few pieces of legislation that went through Congress was the Data Act, which of course is reflective of the fact that different parties will do different things with the emancipation of that data. Some people will use it to remove government, others will use it to try and make government more effective.
Yeah, I mean, here in Germany, there's a party, the Pirates Party, for example. I mean, they love what you do. They've even said that the openness of data, what you are championing, could actually destroy the traditional political barriers and dividing lines that we've known now for 200 years. I mean, that's incredibly disruptive. Do you see that as being a possibility?
I think it's a powerful idea. I mean, I tend to frame the challenge in terms of, traditionally the distinction is seen between left and right.
Right.
And maybe the new way of framing the argument is open and closed.
Okay, excellent. You mentioned Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He is in Texas right now, I think. I know that he was at South by Southwest yesterday, and he was the first person who got to speak with Edward Snowden yesterday by video conference. And he asked Edward Snowden what he would change about the U.S.'s surveillance system. When you look at the discussion that's going on right now, not just with the NSA, but worldwide, what would you change about the notion of surveillance and the way we use the internet?
I think the huge challenge, and it's been echoed by many leaders here at CeBIT, it's very much the concern at the moment, is how do we strike the balance between the security of the state, and states exist to in some sense ensure our security, but and our freedoms as individuals. And that balance is essential to any effective and well-run modern democracy. So the question has to be, as we more powerfully instrument the world, as our technology threads and stitches more and more information together, and actually some of this isn't just the intelligence agencies, it's the fact that in the next 10 years we will see an explosion of life logging. This is where people routinely capture all aspects of their lives, and by so doing capture all aspects of other people's lives coincidentally.
That's what the millennials are doing right now, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The surveillance as opposed to the surveillance.
Okay.
You know, the fact that incredible amounts of information will be captured. We can't stop that happening. What we can do is make people accountable for the way they use that information. And I think the debate to have is how we find that balance point between agencies who are meant to keep us secure and what entitlements we as a society give them to collect and analyze and process. And that is the debate. Again, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
What responsibilities do we as individuals have with our information, with our data?
I think exactly so. We have rights. If we're going to have rights to the information, we have responsibilities. I think that's a very good way to frame the challenge. It more generally applies to the concept of privacy. It's slightly different. Interestingly, in English law, in common law, privacy is defined as a reasonable expectation. And of course, what you seek to demonstrate are harms that arise if you collectively change those reasonable expectations. If we all decide to lower the bar on what people may or can do with our information, you will most assuredly lower the bar on that reasonable expectation. So I think it's actually a more profound responsibility which is to understand that privacy is important to individuals, to effective states and organizations, but to also understand that along with that comes responsibilities, that we have in some sense a duty of care to our own and our descendants' information.
But you're also talking about the definition of privacy that is itself evolving. 25 years ago, did you see that? I mean, was that something that we should have seen coming?
I think some people have seen it coming, and a colleague and I, Kieran O'Hara, wrote a book just a few years ago called The Spy in the Coffee Machine, which, yes. And things have just moved a bit faster than even we probably imagined there. And it most assuredly will continue. This information fabric we're building will be comprehensive. And we have to then put in place safeguards, social conventions, regulation, legislation that gives us guarantees those freedoms going forward. And it will be a very, very important and deep debate.
Who's going to give us those guarantees and those regulations? Is it the nation state, or is it something higher?
If we look back to what happened, I mean, I think this is almost as big a deal intellectually as the ideas that were put forward in the original Enlightenment. I think about this in terms of the digital Enlightenment. We need some founding principles that established some issues as self-evident truths. And those will need to be debated and discussed very widely. And I think it will be a mixture, as it was with those original formulations of what the rights of individuals were and expectations. We need to have that debate very broadly, and it will be a mixture of groups that lobby, individuals who are concerned, and states whose proper object is to try and support freedoms as well as security.
And I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's a good idea. Yesterday, Dame Wendy was sitting next to me. She said she wants a Magna Carta for the internet. It sounds good, but the Magna Carta worked because she had a king who was willing to abdicate some power.
Yep.
A Magna Carta for the internet. Who is the king there? Who is going to give power to us? Who do we talk to? Who is the king?
And I think that is where, in the 25th anniversary of the web, the notion of how we formulate the web we want and who we appeal to and what structures exist to do that, that is a key one. I don't think we have all the answers, but we should be framing the questions and the ambition at that high level.
So who should we be talking to, Sir Nigel? I mean, should it be David Cameron? Should it be Barack Obama? Should it be Mark Zuckerberg? Should it be the Secretary General of the UN? I mean, who has the power right now? I
think no individual state or indeed organization at the scale of Facebook, which almost have state-like powers, is sufficient. We have to be talking to all of those groups, and I think it's a very large-scale conversation that's required. And I think dealing with it in a piecemeal way is part of the problem, that there's little bits and pieces of modification and change here, but this is a larger calling, I think, that we really do need to mobilize around and get some serious horsepower as well as representative groups to help frame the problem. In the UK, a few years ago, we had a very famous commission called the Warnock Commission, which was around what would happen in a world in which stem cell embryology, human fertilization, was moved to the place it now is. And in advance of the technology, people sat down, headed up by a very eminent and respected ethical philosopher, to work out those issues and to put in those very safeguards. So I think it's a conversation at scale, and it has to reflect the fact that not everywhere has equivalent jurisdictions in the world, clearly, so there will be variations in how people respond to this. But for those of us who do care about individual rights, we need to get this right up the agenda.
There is growing tension, growing animosity right now between Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. Are you worried about that animosity is going to create some type of wall building that could make a principle like open data that you champion impossible?
Well, actually, what I hope will happen is that companies will also come to see the opportunities in open data, not just the data that governments provide. I mean, it's easy to try and lay claim to non-personal data that's collected at taxpayers' expense by governments, you know, transport, environmental data. The interesting claim is to think, what corporate data assets are there that could be more valuable made open than closed? And where companies have done this, there's been a very interesting return on investment. That actually being a data incumbent or monopoly is not always the greatest creator of value at scale. And I think that companies would do well to reflect on whether some of their data assets would have more value, both to them and more widely, made open. And we can see examples where that's happened already. To your point about the tensioning between, you know, the large IT estate and government, I think that should be a healthy thing. I think that in some sense, importantly though, companies themselves should not absolve themselves or absent themselves from the ethical debate. This idea that, you know, business doesn't have to have ethics is not one that sits easily with me.
But that is something we've seen the last 25 years, isn't it? That it was all about new technology, pushing the envelope, doing it because we can.
Yeah, yeah, and the pushback you get, interestingly, is just because we can doesn't mean we should do it in a completely untrammeled and unfettered way. And that will be larger interests at stake that require moderation, that require a dialogue precisely between corporations and governments. And I think it's quite healthy that governments will be challenged by the natural forces of the market to say, if we erode and destroy trust in our products, we will actually erode trust in the bottom line, in shareholder value. And it's another form of argument to take to government.
I know a lot of people have asked me to ask you, have you had a chance to personally talk to Edward Snowden?
Have they? No, I have not.
If you could, what would you want to ask him?
I think actually a lot of the questions that were put to him in the interview yesterday kind of address the kinds of issues. It is really important that we understand what is being done broadly in our name, okay? And that it is also in the interest, and this has been acknowledged, in those organs of state, in those agencies who collect this information, to have the approval and consent of their population. If we don't have that balanced, we're in trouble. And I think that whether it's Snowden or other individuals in the past, and doubtless in the future going forward, we will have a need to understand at least broadly what is going on in our name. And the question, of course, is how and where you get that sense of what is being done. Not the details that would compromise national security, or put the lives of those who try to support us and keep us safe in harm.
That's something people accuse him of. I mean, when you look at what he's done and who he is he a hero for you?
He's somebody I look to, and I'm glad that he's been there to in a certain sense, call our attention to this. I mean, whether it was Snowden or someone else, I would think that the role of people who make us look at these issues is one that we should, in a certain sense, applaud.
Do you think, and we're going to open it up to questions in just 1 second, there are people who want, and people at South by Southwest who want him to be able to come back to the U.S., who want him to be granted clemency. What's your opinion about that?
I think that's a concern, I think, for the United States. I would say that where a jurisdiction has a view as to whether or not its laws have been broken.
But he did break the law. I mean, that's not in question. But do you think the higher good is what should be recognized?
I think that is something that is being argued for by a significant number of people, and I think it would be. I don't know how that will play out. I don't have a strong sense of how that will play. For myself, I would think that we recognize through time that people like Snowden can get us to question the direction and the actual purposes and policies of governments, and that can't be a bad thing.
Okay, one more question I wanted to ask you, about what's happening in the UK. With the partner of Greenwald, for example, that he was detained at the airport. Do you see an abuse of power by the government right now in trying to restrict the openness of the internet?
I don't think the UK government is trying to restrict the openness of the internet. I think what has to happen is that in every country we have to understand what is being done with that remarkable tool.
But do you think the government's abusing its power right now in interpreting the use of the internet as something that is suspicious, terrorist?
It's about proportionality. The question is, are we really in a situation where everything has to be monitored to find that needle in the needle factory?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. We've got time for maybe one or two questions. Any questions in the audience? I know that we'd advertised there were going to be some questions. Any out there? We have microphones. Any? I know we've got some on Twitter. If I can pull those up on the Twitter wall. Right there. I know there were some people who, we've got Shuttleworth coming on today, and he has been into outer space. You are an astronaut wannabe. I know some people have said that. This is something totally off topic, but we wanted to ask you about that. How has your love for outer space affected your commitment to an open internet?
Well, one of the great examples of open data is the GPS signal. Originally a military construct, it was Reagan who began to make that data openly available. It has changed the world, okay? So this combination of spaceborne technology and the data that we can derive from it, openly used, is extremely powerful. I mean, the deeper charm for me of space was that growing up, I thought there were three interesting material questions, and as a professor of AI, one of them was, how are we intelligent? Can we make our machines intelligent? Is there anything intelligent out there? So that's always been the charm of space to me.
Okay. My producer's telling me we're running out of time. Any more questions? Any questions out there? Last chance. We are evolving. The internet, a lot of people are saying that the internet is accelerating human evolution.
Yes.
Are we, for the first time in our history, through the internet, in control of the way we're changing?
In control. We are being augmented by the web and the internet, and I think that, and our technology. So there's a new kind of AI. It's not artificial intelligence, it's augmented intelligence. And that is a very fascinating development because the rates of change in the technology are somewhat faster than the slow rates of change in our neurology, but it's boosting us in quite remarkable ways.
Is it ever possible? And I mean, I'm thinking about the Terminator move here. I mean, with big data, with information accelerated, the creation of information and data so quickly, is it possible that we will reach a point where the data itself reaches some level of consciousness, artificial intelligence?
Well, that's...
I mean, I know that it's maybe fantasy thinking, but...
It seems to be the one thing that is totally elusive. It is what gives rise to this spark of awareness.
Yeah.
No matter how much smarts we put into our algorithms or how well Watson does defeating world champions at Jeopardy, there's always this sense of we haven't got that vital component. But what we are producing is a new kind of... Tim called it the social machine. This is machines and people at scale collected collaboratively together to solve problems collectively that no one individual could solve. And that's a kind of interesting hybrid. It's not in itself, it's intelligent in the sense that all those people connected are self-aware. And the total gestalt, the whole thing, has properties that are really more than we might see so many individual, and it's one of the reasons why we are so excited about the subject of web science.
Yeah. Do you ever foresee a time when machines, when created things, will actually be mankind's biggest enemy? We talk about we are our own biggest enemy. Could that change?
I certainly think that we will want to build into those systems, whether they're drones or automatic fire support systems, the equivalent of Asimov's doctrine. We need limits on the ability of these systems to act autonomously, and where they do act autonomously, we need to be very clear about the powers we're giving over to those systems.
Okay, we know there's going to be a party that you talked about, 25 years, World Wide Web.
Should go on for a while.
Okay, there's going to be a cake with the candles. You get to blow out those candles. What's your wish going to be?
My wish is that in 25 years' time, we have got a universal, accessible computing fabric that is the web in 25 years, and not a balkanized set of subwebs.
Okay, very good. Sir Nigel, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. If you want, you can go backstage.
Okay,
I think they're waiting for you, and I'm going to do some housekeeping out here.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to change the setup. We've got a panel discussion coming up in just a few moments. A little bit of housekeeping to let you know. There are two other stages outside. There is the open stage, and there's also the power stage. We'd like to turn your attention to both of those. If you get a chance this afternoon or during the lunch break, go take a look at what's going on out there. Between those is the networking area, and I've been told that the goal should be by the end of each day, if you don't have 5 business cards from someone, you have